Brownies, probably my favorite dessert. These, I will tell you, are not good for you, but that's what makes them so wonderful. So in this recipe, we're going to start with our butter and chocolate mixture. So in this bowl, I have some butter, just a little bit. It's a pound of butter, followed by a pound of semi-sweet chocolate. We're using a combination of chocolate chips and a bar that has been chopped up. And we are using some unsweetened chocolate to balance that out and give a good depth of flavor. So we are going to melt this over top of our double boiler. It's just a pan with about that much simmering water. It's going to gently melt both the butter and the chocolate. You don't necessarily want to do this in a microwave because it can make the chocolate too hot. It can also make it turn gray and it can burn. And when we mix it into our eggs, we want to make sure it's nice and cool so it doesn't scramble our eggs. So in here, we have some eggs, 6 of them, and we are going to add some sugar. We're also going to add in some coffee granules, not ground coffee, like instant coffee granules. You can use decaf if you want. That's going to really bring out the chocolate flavor in these brownies and give it really, really nice depth. And of course, some vanilla paste. So then we're going to whisk these together. You are not going to whip them. We are not trying to incorporate air into this mixture, or else our brownies will become very light and almost cake-like. We're looking for dense, rich, fudgy brownies. So we're just going to whisk it together until it all looks like all of the eggs are incorporated. There's no pockets of vanilla. There's no pockets of the coffee granules. And then we are ready to add our chocolate when it is melted and cooled. So while we're waiting for our chocolate and butter to melt, we're going to prepare our pan. This recipe makes a large amount of brownies. This is a half-sheet pan. You can find them in most hardware stores, online. So we are going to prepare it. I like to use the butter wrappers from the pound of butter that we put into our brownies. It still has some of the butter on it, so I'm going to use that to wipe all over our pan. Get it all out of there. You can also, for time's sake, you can also use just a little bit of butter. Really make sure you get in to all of the corners. There is no point in making all of these wonderful brownies if we can't get them out. Torture. So, I'm going to put all of the butter in here. And I'm going to actually smear it around with one of the wrappers. And then we're going to use some flour. And this flour is actually not part of the measured flour in the recipe. That's okay. This is just enough to kind of prepare our pan. Make sure it's nice and liberally buttered. And then we're going to take some flour and sprinkle it over the pan. We kind of tap it down around the sides. It's going to stick to that butter. And make sure that you have a nice non-stick surface of your pan, so that your brownies come out nice and easily. And then you'll do this in the sink, but we like to just turn it upside down and tap it. And then in a cloud of flour, we have a nicely floured and buttered pan. And we're actually, just to give ourselves that extra insurance, we're going to add a piece of parchment. And then to make sure that that doesn't stick, I like to take some non-stick cooking spray and just give it a very light little spray. And now our pan is ready for our batter. So now my chocolate has cooled and it looks amazing. I kind of want to dive into it, but we're going to add it to our egg and sugar, coffee, and vanilla mixture. We want to make sure that this is cool because if your chocolate is too warm, it can actually curdle your eggs. And I find that it just works better at room temperature. So we're going to add that to our egg mixture. Make sure you get every last drop. And now we're just going to mix these together. Again, we're not trying to incorporate air, but we do want a nice homogeneous mixture. And then we're going to add our dry ingredients. So what makes these brownies so wonderful and rich and dense is that there's a very little amount of flour in it. For 6 eggs and a pound of butter and a pound of chocolate, there is only a cup of flour. So in here I have some all-purpose flour, just a cup. I'm going to add some salt. There's a lot of sweetness going on in these brownies, so you want to balance that with the salt. And some baking powder, which is going to give it lift. And then we are going to just add that to our chocolate and egg mixture. And we're just going to mix it until it's mostly combined. It's okay if you see a few lumps. You don't want to overmix this, or we'll have tough brownies. Now at this point you could add some more chocolate chips, you could add peanut butter chips, you could add nuts if you would like. I like to coat all of those things with a little bit of flour, just a tablespoon or so, just so they don't sink all the way to the bottom of the pan, and sometimes they can burn. But we're going to mix this all together, and once it is pretty well combined, we're going to pour it into our prepared pan. My favorite way to make these brownies is to pour it into the pan and then dot the top with large chunks of creamy peanut butter, and then take 2 knives and swirl them together. But we're just making good old-fashioned brownies today. The other wonderful thing about these brownies is you can make them in advance, put them in an airtight container, and they will last for a couple days. If you're going to not eat them for a couple days, you will want to refrigerate them or even freeze them. They freeze very, very well. And when you're ready to use them, just take them out of the freezer and leave them on the counter for a couple hours or so until they are nice and soft. They will be absolutely delicious. Get every last drop in there. And now we're going to kind of spread it around, make sure it gets out to the corners. And then we are ready to bake it about 350 degrees for about 20 minutes, at which point they will rise up. The baking powder will have activated, it starts to rise, and we're actually going to take it out of the oven and drop it on the counter or on the shelf of the oven to release all of that air so that they stay nice and dense.
Done.
So it's been about 20 minutes, and as you can see, the brownies have risen quite a bit. If you skip this step, the brownies may actually kind of go over the side of your pan. So we pick up the rack and we slam it down. Pick it up and we slam it down. And that was after about 20 minutes, but all ovens will vary in time and temperature. So once we have slammed it back down on the oven grate, we're going to put it back in for another 15 minutes. So after about another 15 minutes, our brownies came out. You want to make sure they're still slightly jiggly in the center. You do not want to overcook these brownies, but then we're going to let them cool to room temperature. We're going to refrigerate them overnight, or as long as you want, and then we will turn them out and cut them into squares.